Sorry.
Okay. Wow, we are lucky. The sun is coming.
Hindu temple, Shiva temple. This is a very famous temple, surrounding area. Holiday, many people coming to here.
So when P.C. Mukherjee came here in 1899, he recorded that there was already a shrine here. Later when Debla Mitra came, she also recorded the shrine. Now the shrine, when P.C. Mukherjee worked here, P.C. Mukherjee reported he found evidence of a medieval temple below. So if you look very carefully, a lot of the brick in the shrine is actually reused. So only in this area do they appear to have dug into the earlier buildings, reused the brick for the shrine. So the history of this area is really interesting because this is where we had our deepest trench. So the deepest trench was just behind Christoph, and that was about 3.5 meters deep. So if you imagine this site, you have to think of it as a series of layer after layer after layer. Now, 3.5 meters deep takes you to 800 BCE. So the history of the site now we're beginning to understand much better. We have the river Banganga flowing along here, along the west, and in about 800 BCE there are 3 villages. There's one just beyond the northern wall in the area of the northern suburbs. Here is another village. And then out towards where your car arrived, that is a 3rd village. So we have 3 villages in about 800 BC. In the 6th century BC, only this village is fortified. The other 2 villages remain outside, always suburban. This area is the one that actually fortifies and becomes the city. And so this area is really important because 800 BCE, the material we have is cord impressed ware, which links to late Chalcolithic period, so it's traditional for this area. So it's a very simple village. Lumbini, when you go there, you'll go to Lumbini village. So at Lumbini village, we have an even earlier village there dating back to 1300 BCE.
1300.
1300. So in the whole of this region, we have occupations, small villages from about 1300 BCE. They're all on slight raises of natural ground to avoid flooding, but then this one is the one that actually formally urbanizes and becomes a city. Now, this site is also interesting because it's the last part of the city to remain occupied. So I've mentioned that a lot of the city dates from Kushan period. Towards the end of the Kushan period, the whole of the city is abandoned. And in fact, at Tilaurakot, I don't know if that's on your trip or for a future trip, there is what
rectangular,
but we've done geophysics on it. So geophysics, we've picked up a similar plan. Has anyone here been to Taxila? Who's been to Taxila? You've been to Taxila. Did you go to Siasuk?
Yeah.
It's exactly the same as Siasuk. So Siasuk is an imperial Kushana center in Taxila Valley in Pakistan. Exactly the same here. Absolutely exactly the same from the geophysics. But this site is more or less abandoned, so urbanization stops at about that point. Now what we have instead is in the center of the city, we have monasteries founded on the ruins of the Kushana buildings. And also here, we seem to have what a major building built a few centuries later. Now you're going to Kodan, yes?
Yeah.
Kodan, I'm not sure what dates you will be given for Kodan or
That brick building.
brick.
In
Yes.
I don't know.
Debla Mitra worked there. She has dates of about 1000 CE for the temple construction at the top. We excavated there and we only found early medieval material. There are other traditions, more recent traditions, which identified it as Nigrodharama, but that's
Nigrodharama, yeah.
there's no archaeological evidence for that. Here, though, at the same time that they're building at Kodan, they're building a huge temple compound here, right here. So in fact, we've excavated, here's Saimai Mai, we're standing just about here, and we have a structure that's about 28 meters, so all the way to that tree, and it's a large rectangular structure, it's a compound. Inside, we have a series of small shrines. So this is the last of the major occupation. Also, it's decorated in carved brick. Not as beautiful as Kodan, but that's because the majority of the upper walls have come down. Kodan, when you visit it, when you look at the wall,
In the
it's
side,
very
yeah, decorative.
Later on, someone has put a huge temple platform in the middle. Here, we don't have the temple platform. Therefore, we only have the compound wall because they're very different shrines. So in about 10th century CE, this is abandoned. And then there's alluvium that washes in, that's blown in from the river, and then the site is ignored until about 18th century when this tank just over here is dug out. So that's what we have here. Just to the north is where we excavated into the fortifications.
So the reason why this place is abandoned is no more water here?
Abandoned. Personally, if you look at the early historic world, most of the big early historic cities are abandoned at that period. So it's almost as if urbanization comes at so high a cost, it becomes unsustainable. So I think it's more of a question of sustainability of what it is for an urban form. And for urban forms to be successful, you need farmers who are willing to subsidize it. So at some point, you will get farmers who do not subsidize it. In its place, at its heyday, we have this city, we have towns, we have villages. It's completely succeeded by a series of major temple sites like Kodan, there's the temple at Lumbini, there's the temple here, we believe there's one at Tilaurakot as well. So we have a completely different approach to land management, probably land ownership, taxation. Some people see that as accompanying Gupta period sort of taxation, but it's an entirely different landscape. So about 5th century CE, the whole of the landscape is transformed from one heavily urbanized, hierarchical landscape into one which is far more, one might term, feudal. Now, what is significant when we excavated over there is, have you come across Debla Mitra?
Mitra.
Are you aware of Debla Mitra's work here? Because she excavated a trench in the 1960s.
Nothing old.
And she said nothing earlier than 2nd century BC. So we were really interested. She also said early phase of the city unfortified. And because of that writing, most people then began to disregard Tilaurakot as being a
That's
possible-
right, that's right.
Now, we were very, very cruel because we re-excavated her trench.
Oh, really?
And also we use scientific dating. This is the sequence. This is her trench here. Now, in her trench, archaeologists always leave a part unexcavated. We call it a balk. So when she got to the center of the wall, she didn't excavate it. So she just looked at the material either side of the center of the fortification. So when we excavated, we opened it up and we cut through. So this gives us a phasing. Do you see these post holes? This is the original fortification in timber.
timber.
It runs on exactly the same axle arrangement, but we have two phases of timber. These are posts which are about this wide. So post, post, post. It's a timber wall. Two phases. Then in Sunga period, we have this big rampart constructed. And on the top of the rampart, we have big posts for timber fence. And it's this point that the big ditch is built. And then later, Kushan wall sticks on top, and then later we have these. But this shows that it's fortified, it urbanizes, 6th century BC enclosing all of this area. And the buildings inside at that period are timber. Now we will move to two next sites. Thank you.
Windy.
Funded by the Royal Society, which is rather fun. Doing medieval water channels, Rajkulo.
I have one question. You talk about timber.
Yes.
Until what centuries that you consider if you find it timber?
아이디어를 발음입니다.
We always go on the dating. So the brick comes in about 4th century. BC, yes. But the brick we have, the earliest brick structures we have are at Lumbini inside the shrine.
Okay.
So there you have the Asokan brick-built temple. Below that you have an earlier brick-built temple, but it's a brick platform, and the bricks there are 48 centimeters by about 38 centimeters, weigh about each one 20 kg. So they are huge. So they are bricks, but not really the sorts of bricks we're used to. Then during Mauryan period, 3rd century BC, you have huge wide-scale use of bricks. But then Kushana everywhere. So the reason I take you here is for two reasons. Firstly, this is the building that P.C. Mukherjee said temple, palace of
Palace,
his father,
palace,
question
yeah,
mark.
palace.
So most pilgrims actually come here. Now, within the geophysics, we know that this is not the palace, because within the geophysics, this is the crossroads of the city, and at the center of the city we have a walled compound measuring 100 meters by 100 meters. So P.C. Mukherjee is an excellent pioneering archaeologist. He doesn't have the benefit of the geophysics. So pilgrims come here, but actually this area here is the palace area. Also, I draw your attention to the conservation, because if you look at photographs, this is where the Japanese worked. If you look at the photographs, all of these walls, which are foundations, originally had post holes for timber. When they did the conservation, all of that technological information was lost. This is why we're very keen to keep this, because it shows this is how conservation used to be done. The conservation we do now actually has the post holes, so you can understand more about the technology. And now we will go to the palace area.
손이 모자란다. 손이 모자라.
But what I think is very important is the grid plan, therefore, is the earliest grid plan that we have within the early historic world. So there's much of a discussion about what's the origin of the grid plan. Some people say maybe it's a Hellenistic influence. Others say it might have a tradition stretching back much earlier. This evidence we have is 6th century BC. We have the grid plan. What is fascinating is when you look at the design of the Arthasastra which is attributed to of course, the Mauryan Empire. But what is interesting is it allocates urban space within a grid plan. So this is the first time, and it's earlier than the Arthasastra, that we have an indication that actually these are, how shall I put it, knowledge systems, urban knowledge systems, planning systems, which shows that these are not just ritual concepts that you get within Manasara, Arthasastra, but these are practical guides for how to create space. And this is so important because this is first example we have in the early historic world. And it shows that compilations that you later find in the Arthasastra of urban planning are already in existence. I shouldn't say it, but we've been working at another city site, which is about 60 kilometers away, and we've picked up an entirely different city plan, which is really exciting. So it looks like this area has exceptionally good preservation of urban forms and of experimentation in urban planning. It may be that there are similar examples within India, but actually successive layer upon layer have meant that these are now inaccessible. So here we have this really exciting urban planning area. So this is the geophysics plot for the so-called central wall complex. We did not want to call it palace because the moment you call it palace, everyone starts sort of rolling. So occasionally, in a moment of weakness, I call it palatial. But we call this central wall complex because it sits at the crossroads, and this road is the main road north. So it comes in, and in the geophysics, this is the plot from the geophysics, we picked up that there was a major complex here at the entrance. So we put in a huge trench running from the corner there to here, and then we started excavating. This is a view of it during excavation, and you can see we picked up this massive entrance. It has a tower behind it. The wall runs 50 meters this way, 50 meters this way, and it's really interesting because the corners are curved. They're not straight corners, they're curved corners. So what we'll go and look at, now you have to remember this actually is probably, we're still looking at the dating, is either Mauryan or Sunga. So if you think evidence of palatial compounds dating to that period, we'd have none of that available to us. So that's again why this is really important. Now you can see at a later period, buildings are constructed on top. So here we have the original area. So you're coming in on the northern gate. This is the major entrance to the complex. This is an open area. This is a forecourt. So you come in through up to the gate. Now we excavated here, and we excavated here, and we found brick at this angle. So this is where the posts for the gates are. We found one here, one here. So we know it's not a single door, it's double doors, and this is the tower. So this is gate tower. Now when you look at it, you think this is a very low wall. And if this had been built in brick all the way up, we would have found huge amounts of brick crushed down, nothing. So therefore, again, foundations are built in brick, the walls are mud. And for those of you who know Nepal, you will have heard of Lomantang, up Trans-Himalayan, up in Mustang. There, the walls are rammed earth. Now, okay, here you have monsoon, which is more complex, but as long as you keep thatch on it, you can actually keep it off. So you're probably looking at walls maybe 4 or 5 meters up. Inside, we have excavated, but nothing is conserved. The buildings here are very different because out there, the walls are all mud. So I've taken you to some of the houses. Low brick foundations, mud walls. In here, the walls are high and they're brick. Originally, they would have been 3 meters high, some of them. So we're dealing with very, very different sorts of building. Also, the floors are not mud like outside, they're all brick floors. We found evidence of reliquaries in here, and when we've excavated into lower levels, we've actually picked up structures. So here you can see very clearly you have brick in the upper levels, you have some brick. In the lowest levels, everything is built in timber.
timber.
So 3 meters beneath our feet, we have this area, but it's all built in timber. So what is fascinating is if you think of the Chinese pilgrim descriptions of seeing ruined walls, actually this would have all been contemporary to their visits. They're visiting 5th century, 7th centuries. All of this would have been visible. Now what is really exciting on top is we have then again contemporary later buildings built on top.
아이리스가 신혼집 부잣집 같다 했는데 여기가 생각 안 나요?
后来说话 I will do 玄奘 story. Oh,
Yeah, you should read very carefully.
very carefully.
Very carefully.
What is really interesting is you can see the Sunga Mauryan wall, the big thick wall just behind Mr. Rajan. You can see this is the compound wall. On top of it, this building is built. So after the abandonment of the palatial compound, we have a series of buildings built. Now we are standing in the middle of the courtyard. The courtyard has a series of cells around. Now, if I was in Taxila, or if I was in Nalanda, or anywhere else, I would look at this, I would say, open courtyard, cells around, I would call it a monastery.
비하라.
Now, what is really interesting then is we have the abandonment of the central wall complex, and in its place we have a series of quadrangular forms, monasteries. Now, when we were working in Lumbini, in the monastic compound there, we found one beautiful alms bowl. It's a huge alms bowl. It dates to about 130 CE, and it has a very distinctive closed form. So it's almost closed like that. Very, very distinctive form. When we excavated here, we found lots of sherds of the same closed form. Now, over there where you see plastic, you can't see anything at the moment because we just cleared the old backfill. But there we have another of these structures. It's a quadrangular structure. In its center, we have 2 stupas. So this only came up last year. One stupa you can see here, very clearly. So this is the stupa that came up. So that's partly why we're back this year, to clear the rest of the stupa. But also we have, what is really interesting, is here is the stupa, round stupa, here is a square stupa. So in the middle of that compound, in the middle of the courtyard, we have a square stupa, a circular stupa, and if you look really carefully, can you see a line running like this? We think this is a Chaitya Griha. This is what we're thinking. So this year we're also, unfortunately PC Mukherjee put a huge trench here. So we are, this year we're clearing back to see how much of these buildings are left, because this is really significant for, I think, understanding Buddhist devotion in this area, but also understanding, if you think of the Chinese pilgrims, they refer to Sangaramas built on the ruins of the old palace.
That's right.
Here we have monastic compounds with alms bowls, with stupas actually right on the monuments. So this is why this is really very, very significant. And in terms of the timing, in terms of the phasing, in terms of the linkages, and we've always been very clear, there is something of a tension between Piprahawa, Gamwaria and Tilaurakot. My own perspective is the border is a modern geopolitical border. There is nothing to suggest that there would not be a cultural uniformity over this area, but there is also no denying that this is the only city in this area, and also it's associated with its own coinage. So when Debla Mitra worked here, she identified coins which are a four-spoked wheel. And even K.M. Srivastava says this is the issued by the kingdom based in Tilaurakot. So what is clear, we have a huge urban form, an extremely ornate urban form, so many synergies with the Chinese pilgrim references, itineraries. A date, we have the topography. I mean, really in terms of, those sorts of elements, if we disregard that sort of evidence, then if we think about the 19th century identifications across South Asia using Chinese pilgrim itineraries and the actual archaeology, we then lose all of our templates. So that's why I think this season will be really interesting when we start to excavate the stupas and we get good dating material. One can always hope sometimes stupas have inscribed material. Sometimes.
요거 유용한데? 요거 녹음 다 해놨으니. 네? 요거 만들어가 1시간 틀어주면 되겠다. 지금 뭐 벌써 찍은 것만 한 30분 넘어요. 여기가 동문입니다. 제일 중요한 문이죠. 경례 is our youngest stop. Working with Andrew Skitton and Kate Crosby.
Okay, very interesting. No, excellent. Now, here we are for pilgrims at one of the most significant points. And P.C. Mukherjee has it here, and this was identified by him as
Eastern Gate.
Now, what I mentioned was everything is remodeled. So the crossroads and the eastern gate from the crossroads is actually in that direction. This gate leads to where we met. We saw that small shrine at the beginning. And so towards the end of the city, this becomes one of the most important streets. So we don't have evidence that it's as important early on, but what we do have evidence is that during the Kushana period, this is embellished and this becomes one of the most important places to visit on the city route. So most people see this part with the city wall, guardhouses as the gate. Now, actually, we did geophysics just outside. So this used to be car park.
Outside,
people would park here. We did geophysics and we picked up a series of brick walls under the surface. So here we are, here at the gate. Actually, we have a huge entrance complex here. So this is the back side of the entrance complex. So everyone comes here, this is where they venerate, but during the Kushan period, these walls actually came out, crossed the moat, and then there was a big compound there. So there's a compound measuring about 30 meters by 30 meters. Then you have 3 brick walls forming a causeway across the moat, and then it links to here. Unfortunately, in the 1990s, this road was built and the fence. So it completely, I use the horrible term, divorces. It divorces the city and this part of the gate with that part. So originally, this would have been a gigantic entrance complex. So you would come from that direction, you would find this big open brick courtyard, then you would cross the causeway and come into the city. And at this point, so it shows you this is the moat, and you can see the road is built directly on top of the moat. And one of our challenges is that actually outside the city we have significant archaeology as well. So to the north we have a suburb and then the Twin Stupa.
Twin Stupa.
To the west we have a huge residential
Residential.
area. To the south we have a metalworking area. So what P.C. Mukherjee originally thought was a stupa is actually a huge area of slag.
Ah, not stupa.
Not
South.
a stupa, it's all metalwork.
Oh, I see.
So it's metalworking, it covers an area of 30 metres by about 15 metres, and that was metalworking from about 400 BC, was metalworking. Here we have monasteries out here. So the Eastern Stupa is just behind the bus. This is part of the Eastern Stupa. You can see it's a series of rings. What we also found was, in one point, we found cut into the clay a semicircular mark. So they must have had a string and and this is how they made the diameter. So we found that. This is the Eastern Stupa complex. So if you think that is 50 meters, 50 meters. So here is the stupa. This is a tank. This is a tank. Here's another tank. And these are all monastic compounds. So you can see it's a gigantic complex. And last year, this is where, not on the stupa, but beyond here, this is where we found smaller stupas. There's a stupa courtyard, and inside the stupa courtyard there is a ring well, but also a series of stupas, some of them measuring 3 meters by 3 meters. What is interesting is this is the overall landscape. Now, we have Tilaurakot here, so this is where we are. Now, when you go back on the road, Dr. Cooper's will point out to you Dahani and maybe point in the direction of Karma. Because what we've done is, with Department of Archaeology, we've also excavated at these two sites. Now, at Lumbini, just next to the village, there was a beautiful well discovered. And on each line of bricks, you have a different stamp. Elephant, conch shell, snake, tree, trident, peacock as well. Peacock. Now, we found one close to Bairoa. So these seem to be the course of the ancient road, goes from Bairoa to Lumbini. Lumbini then to Karma. Karma is a small fortified enclosure measuring about 50 meters by 50 meters. Dahani is similar, measuring 50 by 50 meters. So about every 13 to 15 kilometers,
There is the wall.
you have a way station, either a well or an enclosure. So in terms of thinking again about pilgrimage, about the movement of pilgrims, movement of traders, clearly this is the ancient pilgrim route, which again for us demonstrates that there is a direct linkage between Lumbini and
Tilaurakot.
because we actually have it physically on the ground every 13 kilometers. And if you think a bullock cart going slowly or someone walking tends to be about 13 to 15 kilometers a day. So for us, it's the landscape which is important as well. I believe that is the end of the standard tour.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.